Welcome to the AM Update, Week in Review. A collection of the best moments from Aaron McIntyre's Morning Update.
Taylor Swift has been unseated as the world's youngest self-made female billionaire, according to Forbes. She was unseated by a 30-year-old hard-partying college dropout who has reaped a windfall from the artificial intelligence boom. Lucy Guo, a self-professed workaholic who rides an electric skateboard to work when she's not being chauffeured by an assistant, has a net worth of $1.3 billion, according to Forbes' list of America's richest self-made women that was released this week. Guo took Swift's title of world's youngest self-made woman billionaire in April when it was reported that Scale AI, that's the firm she co-founded with Alexandr Wang in 2016 when she was just 21 and he was 19, that firm has been valued at $25 billion in a deal set to close this month. The tender offer has not yet been finalized, but it's expected to close at a valuation in a few weeks. Guo is the daughter of Chinese immigrants and was raised in San Francisco, where she picked up coding in middle school, dropped out of Carnegie Mellon University, as she clinched a $100,000 entrepreneurial scholarship bankrolled by billionaire investor Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is the chairman of a company called Palantir Technologies. It's a big data analysis company, and he's been its chairman since its inception back in 2003. Alex Karp is actually the CEO of Palantir, and you may have seen headlines in recent days. It was from the New York Times, which originally reported it, that Palantir Technologies had been contracted by the Trump administration and the federal government to create a centralized database with data on every single American. That sounds really scary. And if it's true, any version of that is true, it absolutely is scary. And then you take into account words like this from Alex Karp a few years ago at a World Economic Forum confab, where he brags about how some of his companies, like Palantir...
Look, we built PG, which single-handedly stopped the rise of the far right in Europe. We built Foundry, which was used to distribute the COVID vaccine and saved millions of lives globally. We built what we call multi-constellation, and what's often called the digital kill chain.
So that is Alex Karp not that long ago at the World Economic Forum, bragging about how some of his company's software and technologies have, quote, single-handedly stopped the far right in Europe. Now, if you'll recall, I believe it was late last year, I featured a clip from Alex Karp after the election, where he in no uncertain terms discussed his pride in America, the hope he has for this country in the aftermath of the 2024 election, and how he is determined to make sure that this country turns around. But we saw those headlines this week, mostly from the New York Times, which caused me pause, and it should you as well, that his company has been contracted to create a database with data on every single America via Palantir Technologies. I had not really seen a counter to this narrative, and a lot of people on the right have picked this up. A lot of more anti-Trump people on the right have picked up this story. So that's kind of the story. The New York Times reporting that Palantir, Alex Karp, that's Peter Thiel and Alex Karp's company, has been tasked to set up for the federal government a centralized database. Bad idea if it's true on any level. Well, I stumbled upon this thread from somebody named Wendy Anderson. Let me just read her bio to you. Hashtag national security and hashtag defense technology executive. Department of Defense alum, ex-Palantir. So already, it kind of sounds like a deep stater bio, but I want to read this X thread that she put together because a lot of people are just posting that New York Times article. Let's get another side of the story here. Here's what she had to say. Quote, after spending almost 6 years at Palantir, I know something about what they do and what they don't do. As a result, I want to address the inaccuracies in the May 30th New York Times article that's been picked up by multiple outlets this week. In this thread, I speak solely for myself. I departed Palantir in April and will share my new chapter soon. My purpose here is simple, to call for an honest and accurate reporting, especially in an era increasingly shaped by distortion and disinformation. Plenty of the people have had valid criticisms of Palantir, and I at times raised concerns while I was there, as the culture encourages. I believe in speaking up. I also believe in getting the facts right and straight. Criticize what you find problematic, but start with the truth. Inaccuracy number 1, the headline, Trump taps Palantir to compile data on Americans, is fundamentally wrong. Palantir doesn't do that. They provide software that helps organizations analyze data those organizations already process. Inaccuracy number 2, the article suggests Palantir is building a master database. That's not how Foundry, that's a software, that's not how Foundry works, Wendy Anderson says. It's data integration platform that connects to existing systems. Inaccuracy number 3, which could easily merge data on Americans, that's a quote. This framing makes standard enterprise data integration sound sinister. Many companies and government agencies use similar tools to work with data across multiple systems. This isn't unique or nefarious technology. Inaccuracy number 4. The article seems to conflate what software can do with what it is doing. Yes, data integration tools can theoretically be misused. So can Excel, SQL databases, or any data tool. The article provides no evidence of misuse, only fear about possibilities. Inaccuracy number 5, describing routine government IT modernization as surveillance infrastructure. Agencies updating their data systems and analytics capabilities is normal. Accurate statement. Palantir has said they're a data processor, not a data controller. Clients define what data is accessed and how it's used. This is a crucial distinction that the article glosses over while creating surveillance panic. Again, Palantir does not collect, store, or sell personal data. The article takes standard enterprise software functionality and frames it as dangerous surveillance tech. It's like writing a scary article about Excel because, quote, it could be used to track Americans if someone put personal information or data in spreadsheets. Palantir is a public company in a democracy with a robust respect for the First Amendment. Of course, there are legitimate things to scrutinize and criticize, as with any company. From contracts to clients to strategy, Dr. Karp himself has said countless times, we built Palantir with the idea that dissent is not only acceptable, but required. But don't represent what their software does. Facts matter. So, all that I've seen from most people sharing this New York Times article on the right is the very scary headline and some of the factoids within that story. I just wanted to provide you the other side of the story. I don't know which side is necessarily true, which side is fake news, which side is true news, but I thought I could inform you a little bit better than what I've seen so far this week.
You're listening to the AM Update, Week in Review. Follow on X and Instagram at Real AM Update.
Tim Walz was back on another podcast discussing again this phenomenon that we've seen of young men shifting rightward. Here's what he had to say.
The same road of saying you got a place to belong. And I think this is me just pontificating for what it's worth. Social media and other things have disconnected people more than they were. We were more connected in my generation. It was easier to be a kid when I was growing up. And I've always said this as a teacher, if you don't give a kid a place to belong, they'll go find one. So why you want them to be involved in sports and music and things in school, because they will go find a group of folks. And I think Donald Trump understands belonging, understand groups. I mean, you look at it. He gives them a uniform, the red hat. He gives them some chance, some talking points, whatever. It's not all that different than when we build sports teams in high school. You belong, you're part of this. It's not so much the policies. I think it's incredibly dangerous, but I don't think we went out to get them. We didn't out to make them feel a part of this.
That is incredibly infantilizing and condescending. People don't like, or the young men like Donald Trump because they get to wear a hat and they get to chant things. Incredibly infantilizing. And then there's this from Nate Silver, who writes recently, quote, although I've seen it written about elsewhere, I was honestly surprised by how strong the relationship is. And we'll get into what this relationship is. Among voters who report poor mental health, liberals outnumber conservatives 45-19, based on data he has compiled and seen. This is Nate Silver. Among those who report excellent mental health, conservatives outnumber liberals 51-20. So the young men that Democrats have trouble with aren't necessarily the ones who have been captured by the conservative manosphere or who are looking for a helping hand. Rather, it's those who report relatively high mental health and see Democrats as being too neurotic and perhaps constraining their opportunity to compete and reap the rewards of their work. Again, that's data gleaned from pollster Nate Silver at 5:38. And finally, air analysis, slightly acidic, mostly necessary. Watching Democrats continue to try to figure out what ails them with different voting groups, particularly young men, as you heard Tim Walz talk about there. To me, it's kind of like watching a dog try to do quadratic equation, or trying to tell a dog to do quadratic equation. Chances are, if you say, "Here, boy, here, solve this problem. Here you go, boy. Solve a times x squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Come on, boy, you can do it." The dog is probably going to wag his tail, get really excited. He knows he's supposed to be doing something. He just has no idea what it is. And if he ever did, he'd have no idea how to do it. This is what it's like, from my perspective, watching Democrats try to figure out how to talk normally to normal people in general. Young men in specific. This is the last time, probably, that I'm going to address this topic for a while, because it's something a lot of people are talking about, and I try my best to do my best zig when everybody else zags. But I think it's important to understanding their psyche over there, understanding what drives them, because they will never, ever admit, that people dislike their policies, because admitting that would be admitting that they were wrong and that they lost. And the communist will never do that, as I said last week. The funny part is, the ironic part is that Democrats don't even need young men. They're low propensity voters. Low propensity voters. They're hard to get to the polls. They could win without them. But the rejection, I believe, stings, and that's why you've seen so much attention and energy. They're going to light $20 million on fire to study the syntax, quote unquote, of young men. And then there's the other part of what I talked about. That data from Nate Silver that's trying to quantify in secular terms a spiritual battle. I want to go over that again. What that's actually saying is that people who have an ordered life, that's what they're talking about in terms of those reporting excellent, quote unquote, mental health. Those who have an ordered life, they tend to be more conservative. An ordered life would assume what? A purpose-filled life. Because what is your life in order for, if not for purpose? A disordered life is one that has no purpose. And of course you're going to report, quote unquote, poor mental health. And that's where liberals outnumber conservatives more than 2 to 1. An ordered life, a purpose-filled life, that's where conservatives outnumber liberal voters by an even greater margin, 51 to 20, according to Nate Silver. If we look back on this period of time, the late 2010s and mid-2020s, if we look back on this time, and it is true that there is some sort of spiritual revival in this country, I think we're going to look back on factoids like this as leading indicators. It may not be a straight line to get where we think we want to go. Heck, it may not even be shiny, happy people. It probably won't be if we actually experience real revival. Shiny, happy people, meaning we can do this with little to no pain. But it seems clear to me that there is a spiritual battle taking place. And I think both sides are starting to recognize this reality. I think one side has the higher propensity of recognizing and knowing what time it is. The other side is in denial. And I think that other side right now happens to be a political party that starts with the letter D. White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller. He was interviewed by Fox News to discuss what exactly is going wrong with the Democrat Party.
Where do you think their party goes from here?
Part of the reason why they have resorted to lawfare as effectively their entire political strategy is because they have an unsellable ideology. In other words, they're committed in a popular democracy. They're committed to a series of beliefs that are like 10, 20% in support. So they have to be corrupt. to get anything done. Men and women's sports, as President says, completely open borders to the worst criminals on the face of the earth, people guilty of child predation, murder, even people who are guilty of violent torture and beating and killing and just senseless slaughtering. And they're let in without limitation for 4 years, right? A political party that's committed to raising taxes on everybody, right? A political party that is against the police, that wants to defund the police in your community, that wants to let rioters run free. And the punching bag for all of this are the hardworking American citizens. The people who do it right, they're the ones who are getting the brunt of it every day, economically, socially, culturally. So it's an unwinnable political message. If we can accomplish these reforms to just have a free and fair society, the Democrats are doomed. They cannot compete or operate in a fair system, which is why they have to rig it.
There's White House Deputy Chief of Staff putting more meat on the bones of my commentary last week, talking about the Democrats not having a messaging or authenticity problem, but a matrix problem. They have set up the system that all that they have is an unsellable, as Stephen Miller said, an unsellable political ideology. That's where they went wrong. That's why they resort to lawfare. In tandem with this, I saw this clip over the weekend as well. What do you make of the fact that we see polls, which are frequently used as propaganda? The only reason I cited Atlas Intel earlier is because they have a pretty good track record, at least the last couple of cycles, but frequently used as propaganda or just inaccurate, wholly inaccurate. But what do you make of polls, however, saying that still the majority of people in this country think that we're on the right track, while President Trump, who is the leader of this country, has, we're being told, an underwater favorability? Well, here's the Heritage Foundation's president, Kevin Roberts, during a debate up in Canada featuring himself and Kellyanne Conway versus a couple of libs named Ezra Klein and Ben Rhodes, discussing this very phenomenon. Here's Kevin Roberts.
And one real important thing to keep in mind, also keeping in mind that your Canadian media try to vaccinate you from the truth, is that Donald Trump remains very popular. Over half of Americans, as we sit here tonight, say that the country is on the right track. A marked change, as you know, from the previous 4 years. Why do they say that? Because regardless of what they think about Donald Trump as a person, regardless of what they think about specific policies, regardless of their recognition that this is just the dawn of the golden age and that it will take years and decades to accomplish its objectives, that we're finally back on the right track. And the advent of a Trump-Vance political coalition, which is more working class, more multi-ethnic, means that Americans of all backgrounds, as it should be, support this agenda. And of course, in order for that agenda to realize the American dream, something that too few Americans believe in anymore, there will have to be success. And we've already seen success in beginning to end the regulatory environment that stifles not the business of the Fortune 50 companies that collude with big government, but that stifle the American dream for small and middle class, small business owners and middle class Americans.
So there is Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts pointing out during a debate in Canada that regardless of what people think personally of President Trump, the right track, wrong track continues to outperform Trump himself. It's not so much of, I think it's a mixture. I don't know what the ratio is, but it's definitely a mixture of what you heard from Stephen Miller there, saying that the Democrats have an unsellable ideology. It's a mixture of a reaction to that and a belief in what President Trump is doing. And I pray for his administration that they are able to follow through with their America First vision and what they're selling for this country to the utmost.
You're listening to the AM Update, Week in Review. Follow on X and Instagram at Real AM Update.
It was always a terrible idea. Ever. Like ever. It was always a terrible idea to allow any foe on the geopolitical stage, any rival on the geopolitical stage, any country, any force that you have any doubt about. It was always a bad idea to allow them to purchase any investment properties or any investment real estate anywhere near our military installations, especially on the mainland. But whether it's in Grand Forks, North Dakota, at the Grand Forks Air Force Base, or in Texas near Laughlin Air Force Base, or Fort Bragg in North Carolina, Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming, Camp Grayling in Michigan, all examples in recent years of either successful or close to successful operations by Chinese Communist Party aligned businesses and businessmen from buying investment properties and real estate. Now, I want to clear up a misconception that I intentionally threw out there. You'll hear this term when it comes to Chinese business, Chinese individuals, what have you. You even heard this from Secretary of State Marco Rubio last week. Chinese-aligned, CCP-aligned students. And I totally support what he's doing, trying to draw down some of these student visas. A long time coming. But it's a misnomer to say that any of these entities are CCP-aligned, as if there are businesses in China that are not CCP-aligned. They're all CCP. It's a command economy, especially given some of their overt intentions with what they want to do geopolitically. You should always just assume as the baseline that anybody in this country trying to do business in this country, physically in this country, from China, is a threat. Now, why do I bring all of this up? It was always a bad idea to even let the Chinese businessmen, Chinese businesses, acquire property near military installations. That was just always a bad idea. That's just common sense. You don't allow your enemies to potentially set up surveillance operations anywhere near your military bases. But in light of what we think happened in Ukraine, or with Ukraine, deep inside Russia, now you understand even more what the threat this is and what it poses. We're talking about little old Ukraine. Little old Ukraine. Using what we're told are civilian-marked semi-tractor trailers deep inside Russia, all the way in Siberia, thousands of miles away. And they were able to carry out one of the most sophisticated asymmetrical attacks, maybe in the history of warfare, using drones against military installations inside Russia. So it was always a bad idea to allow foreign nationals, foreign companies to purchase, especially ones aligned with China, to purchase any form of real estate, any form of property, anywhere within spitting distance of U.S. military installations. That's just common sense. But in the year 2025, allowing them to even have this property, if it exists now, that's just straight up retarded, especially in light of where modern warfare is headed. The illustration that we just saw over the weekend, it's headed in a very sophisticated and hard to stop place. And I wonder how many Chinese-aligned, Chinese-owned warehouses, either here or in Canada, because they have even closer ties, the Chinese Communist Party, they have even closer ties to Canada than they do to the United States. I wonder how many warehouses in Canada are filled with drones, similar to what we saw Ukraine use, just waiting to deploy to some of these properties that they've tried to purchase and sometimes successfully purchased near U.S. military bases. What we saw over the weekend is a new, let's just call it a new front line in modern warfare. Little old Ukraine able to strike deep and make a cut deep inside the heart of Russia. Now you know why it was always terrible, always a terrible idea to allow foreign powers like China to try to purchase real estate close to military bases. And these days, it's just straight up retarded, especially in light of what we saw over the weekend. Poll of the week I asked you is the big beautiful bill. I gave you 3 different options. In 4th place, comment below. We'll get to those in a little bit. In 3rd place, mostly good. 15.6% of respondents said the big beautiful bill is mostly good. In 2nd place, 28.7% said the big beautiful bill doesn't matter, or it's more complicated than whether it's just good or bad. And in first place, 51.2% say the big, beautiful bill is mostly bad. Let's hear what you had to say. J.R. Burdick says should be renamed the Boomers' Big, Beautiful Bill. It's all good for them. J.R. Burdick, I'm sure you would agree with me in saying that overall, and if you're a boomer listening to this, overall, the boomer generation has been, let's just say, a disappointment. And if this doesn't, again, if you're a boomer listening, if that doesn't apply to you, it doesn't apply to you, so don't take offense. But J.R. Burdick, I would caution you, these sweeping pronouncements like this, just be careful what your motivation is. We both agree that the boomer generation has been, let's put it mildly, a disappointment. Just be careful that you're not making an idol out of boomer criticism. I don't know, something in my gut just tells me that I need to tell you that. Cyberpunk Dystopia says, more spending, yay. I sense a little sarcasm there. Barbara says, equally good and bad. Buys us time, does some good on the conservative priorities, but strapping our kids with more debt is abominable. In the end, I don't think there was ever a way to fix the financial hole we're in. Barbara, I keep coming to that conclusion myself over and over again. And I probably will until I see actual bipartisan political will to put an end to these ridiculous amounts of spending that we're doing. And we're not going to have a bipartisan consensus in Washington until there's a bipartisan consensus of the people. That's just the reality. Country Squire says, just make the best out of it. He copies a tweet where he said, we need to take the inventory of the big, beautiful bill the way a survivalist takes inventory of what he has in his pockets during a survival situation. Utilize what you have and don't dwell on what you don't. Prepare better that next time. It's well said, Country Squire. Andrew says, hard to say if it's mostly good or bad. Who knows what's really in it? Since most of Congress is corrupt, it's probably best we can do. Somebody once said, revival or bust. The people are the problem. Will in Wisconsin says, Elon is correct. A bill can't be both big and beautiful. Generally agree. Connor Willis says, no one really knows whether it's good or bad because none of us are reading it. Just being honest. Well, I appreciate that, Connor. Jim says, one has to assume a bill that's thousands of pages long is stuffed with more pork than Lindsey Graham on date night. Yikes. We might get a few wins, but omnibus bills always have poison pills. Consider that our leaders hate us. I'm guessing the bill will be a net negative. Emmanuel Mueller says omnibus bills are never good. Stubbornmom.com says, why do there need to be 250 items in one bill? For reasons. Brett says, who cares? It's not enough.
This has been the AM Update Week in Review. The AM Update will be back on Monday and every weekday at 4 a.m. Eastern Time.